All right, time to take a deep breath and get into this room. The speakers have been so great, and I could listen to Trevor for the rest of my life and probably never hear the same thing twice. And I would be a better person for it, but I was having trouble staying awake. And I am in the coveted post-lunch slot, which you're all familiar with. So I want to give you permission to get up and move that way, away from the camera, and avoid that little one over there. Is that a camera, Dave?
Yeah, it is.
Okay, that one too. May have to crawl a little bit like Mary did to close the window this morning. But if you need to get up, please do. And at some point, if I see all of you trying really hard to look attentive, and your eyes are starting to glaze a little, then we're going to stop and do some calisthenics. You know, move around, maybe do a little marching or face slapping. To get ourselves alert. I don't know. I think it'll go a little shorter, but then again, I never really know what's going to happen. So I think it'll go a little slower. And then you'll have some time to march down the street and get yourself a good cup of coffee or take a rest or whatever it is you need to do. I want to thank you for your generosity and for your patience. I was talking to Richard Foster recently, and I said, you know, I think maybe what pastors really need these days is some tips and solutions. Wouldn't that be helpful? Richard looked at me and he said, Mimi Dixon, keep it on the inner life. Because if you keep the first thing first, second things will follow. But if you focus on second things, you lose both first and second things. So we quoted C.S. Lewis there. And so I, in my ministry, had a real temptation to get pulled into focusing on my work, trying to solve it, and I've talked to you about that. And you generously have listened when I said I felt like it was my responsibility, which meant I doubled down. And I looked around to see what people were doing that looked like it was successful, and I gave it a whirl to see if it would work in my situation. So I did a lot of resourcing like that and trying to learn from people that were, I felt, really making a difference. But Jesus, as I told you, Jesus just kept pulling me back to the center. So I don't know how I would have responded to an opportunity like this 10 or 15 years ago. I may have had a little frustration that I wasn't coming away with, with a list of things I could do. But the Lord brought me into other things where He began to emphasize and tell me it's all about what's going on between you and the Trinity in your own heart, and you yourself will become contagious. You yourself will become the message. You become the curriculum. Trevor talked about that this morning. And there is something about that that smells different. Richard said it's the smell of gospel. It's a fragrance. My name, Miriam, means living fragrance, and my brothers never let me hear the end of it. But I like to think that it was a promise that one day I would bear the fragrance of Christ, and I believe that's His promise to each one of us. So when we were in the ISIT training program, I can't believe it. My phone is writing down everything I said. What are you doing here? Gosh, go away. That's technology, spiritual technology. It was transcribing everything I said. I'm like, okay.
Did you just distribute it to the whole group?
Right. They say the phone is always listening. Think about that. Okay. So I'm now through with my digressions. When I was in the ISIT program, I think Trevor read a poem by Rob Marsh, who was a Jesuit priest. And when I heard it, I was absolutely touched to the core. I felt these words in my bones. So as we start talking about life's greatest opportunity, I'd like to share with you the words of Rob Marsh. As Jesus goes to his cross, what dies is not just a dream or a project. It is my beloved. I'm not mourning my shattered hopes, my doomed calling. I'm mourning a man I have come to love. Sounds like the Emmaus Road, doesn't it? I thought my dreams had died. I thought they were shattered. At the start, he was all abstraction and hope and activity. But by the end, he is the man I have come to know intimately. I've watched his birth and held his warm weight. I've been there as he's grown up and been made man before me. I've seen his struggle and loved his laughter. I've gazed at him and found him gazing back. I've heard my name on his lips. I've been drawn into his friendship. I've watched him work, suffered his hardship, wrestled with his self-discovery. I've discovered that I need him and been sweetly shocked that he needs me too. Something has happened. I have fallen in love. And read it again. As Jesus goes to his cross, what dies is not just a dream or a project. It is my beloved. I'm not mourning my shattered hopes, my doomed calling. I'm mourning a man I've come to love. At the start, he was all abstraction and hope and activity. But by the end, he is the man I have come to know intimately. I've watched his birth and held his warm weight. I've been there as he has grown up and been made man before me. I've seen his struggle and loved his laughter. I've gazed at him and found him gazing back. I've heard my name on his lips. I've been drawn into his friendship. I've watched him work, suffered his hardship, wrestled with his self-discovery. I've discovered that I need him and have been sweetly shocked that he needs me too. Something has happened. I've fallen in love. Rob Marsh. So we come into this session 6, coming alive to life's greatest opportunity. And Jesus flips that. He flips it away from what we're marinated in our culture to understand as having significance, being satisfied, knowing that you matter, you have value. And he does things, not just did, but does things that are so inverted. He hardly ever answers my prayers. And it isn't, I don't think, because I pray poorly. My first experience of profound unanswered prayer was Jimmy Didiris. I was a summer intern at Menlo Park Presbyterian Church, college intern working with junior high kids, wild and crazy. And a young couple in the church heard that I was talking about Jesus and the power of God and the intimacy of his presence. And so they came and saw me, and they said they had a newborn boy. Jimmy was about 1 month old, hydrocephalic. And they asked me if I'd come and pray for Jimmy, that God would heal him. I said, absolutely, sure. Because I couldn't imagine that God would answer that prayer. I was absolutely certain that Jimmy would be healed. So with great expectation and youthful vigor, I drove over to their house and met Jimmy, anointed him with oil, prayed for him. And then my summer term ended, I went back to college, and I received a telephone call from the family that at 3 months Jimmy had died. Felt like a sword pierced my soul. They spoke of the difference in Jimmy after that time of prayer. They spoke about how he stopped struggling. They talked about how there was a radiance about him. They talked about holding his warm weight. They talked about the way that he would look into their eyes, that he was an old soul. So they were not angry, they weren't upset, they weren't frustrated with God. They had discovered something and received something that I wasn't there to see or receive. All I knew was that God didn't heal a little baby boy. So I didn't pray again, not for years. It's interesting to find Jimmy coming into my mind now. Isn't that interesting, the way the Holy Spirit kind of surfaces something that rises like a bubble and then it goes, and you go, oh, Jimmy. And then I met Jesus and fell in love with him. And one of the things that he's been doing in me, and I wish we could just take the rest of this day, maybe the rest of this month, and have each one of you sit here with a microphone like people did after 9/11 in New York. Sigourney Weaver said that they came into an empty theater, and on the stage was a spotlight and a microphone, and the rest of the audience was in the darkness, and people told their stories of what happened on 9/11. And you know what the room felt like. People held them, they were quiet, there were tears, and people told their stories and they unburdened. There's so much I don't really know about prayer, except that prayer is pillow talk for me. It's that intimate conversation with somebody you trust deeply and intimately. But as well as you know him, you can't predict what he will do. Not because he's too busy or uncaring or callous, but because there's this transformational arc in history. And I struggle to get the perspective that the Trinity has to read some meaning, perhaps, into my little part of the story. If I read 1 Corinthians 13 properly, one day we will know everything. And my little list of things that I'd really like to talk to Jesus about, I don't think it's going to make it. Because I think the moment I am there, all those questions will go away. And I will be overwhelmed by beauty. And nobody will be lost. Richard tells me the story about how he was there right at the end when Dallas was dying. And Dallas was resting, Jane Willard had called and said, Dallas, you better come. So Dallas got on her plane and flew down to Southern California. And he was with Dallas, and Dallas was exhausted. He was tired, so Richard left for a few hours, and he knew he'd come back that evening. He went to look for the little Wood Lake congregation where the church where he had met Dallas all those years ago, when he was fresh and green out of seminary. Dallas and Jane were already in that little Quaker Friends church. And it wasn't there. They'd scraped it and put up an apartment building. Made Richard sad. So he went back to the hospital, and that evening Dal said, so Richard, where'd you go today? And Richard said, I went to find the Wood Lake Church. And Dallas laughed, that laugh of his deep chest laugh, even though he was so weak. And he said, it's not there anymore, is it? Richard said, no, and it made me so sad. You know what Dallas said? Oh, Richard, don't worry. It'll be there in heaven. Dallas was on the threshold in a 2-week class I took. Maybe some of you did the same thing. He talked about divine conspiracy. He had just finished the galleys, they're called proofs now, and they were in a stack on the desk, and he invited us to read the manuscript of Divine Conspiracy before it was published. So of course I did. I read a chapter each night. And I remember when he talked about chapter 10, paradise. What are we looking forward to? What does eternity look like? He goes over and he stands in the door. And he said, I think we get to a point where we stand in the doorway between the world, and it's like a huge mansion. Only right now we only have access to the kitchen. And he stands in the doorway and he said, here's what I imagine. I imagine that we'll be standing in the doorway and we can look this way and see the people we love gathered around the table with a good cup of coffee. And on this side, people who are waiting for us. And he talked about that. He said to Jane, just a little while before he died, there are people here that we know. I've been in the room, and so have you, with people who are very close, and they are looking around the room like they're seeing people. And I keep thinking, I hope I'm not standing on anybody's foot or accidentally elbowing somebody. But the place is stuffed with people who've gone on before, and Dallas could see it. He was that close. He talked about living today as we will for all eternity, in the assurance that we're seen and we're accompanied. And Jesus is a first responder, and he runs toward people who are in despair and have no hope. And he says to me, Mimi, will you come with me? And I say, I would rather not. And he says, you get to choose. That's okay. And then I see him start away, as I told you, and I can't stand it. And all I do is just show up like a kid. I saw Mother Teresa once in Denver at McNichols before they tore it down and put up the Pepsi. Said, why do people tear everything down? Anyway, she walked in and she was like 2 inches tall. She was like 4'8" or something, really tiny, all kind of, She comes shuffling in, and I'll tell you, I love the Catholics. They put on a show. They had choirs and people singing and all that. She comes into the room. She's over on stage left, looking from the audience side. She's over there. And she's sitting in a chair. And in front of her, on the floor, were 200 children, seriously disabled in wheelchairs. They couldn't even lift themselves up. And this is what I had binoculars on. Boy, did I ever have a headache after 2 hours watching her. What does it look like? She sat there with her beads, and there was nobody over here. I saw her leaning over like this. She walked in with Jesus. And Jesus is telling her about that little boy right there. And she would look at the boy's face, and her face would soften, and there'd be tears in her eyes. And then she'd start working her beads, and her lips were moving. She wasn't listening to the big show. She was with that child. And she did that, she had enough time, because it was a big show, to go through every single one of those 200 children and pray for them as she sat there. She was completely unself-conscious. Oh, I'm Mother Teresa, and this is all for me. She walked in like a child holding on to Jesus' hand. Everybody was focused on Jesus. He just said, "You want to go to work with me today?" She said, "Sure." She was completely unaware of herself. And the thought came into my mind as I looked at that woman. I said, "Me too, Jesus. I want to be like that." In my experience, I don't know what your experience is like, but Jesus is extremely repetitive with me. Way repetitive. And he doesn't say a whole lot of new stuff. He just keeps saying the same thing in different ways, hoping that maybe it'll take this time. And one of the things I try to say is, I just like it when you're with me. I really like it when you come along. And who among us doesn't love it when somebody that we love comes with us? It makes the whole thing an adventure. It makes it better. Just having their presence makes all the difference. And I've come to believe that that's where my value is seated, in being a little kid that comes along with Jesus, just present to what he's doing. That is life's greatest opportunity. How amazing. God could just fix stuff. Why in the world would he design his world so that people like us, who are so changeable, are the ones that he relies on to be his visible presence to others as we follow him into situations? But he doesn't have a plan B. So, when evil is so visible in our world as it is today, when people are being broken down, when they're being marginalized, when people are saying things that are so divisive, evil does not have any power of its own. It can't initiate anything. It has no strength. All it can do is respond to the light and try to stamp it out like little fires. So if we see a prevalence of darkness in our world, that's indication that Aslan is on the move. The spirit is on the move. This is based on finally listening to what Jesus has been saying all these years, instead of deflecting it or getting too busy with something over here. I believe that the reason we're here is because Jesus is reminding us of who we are. That we are his means of grace. We are the way that people come to know that they're really loved and valued, because they hear it from our lips, but more than that, they see it in our expression and in our body language and in our willingness to welcome, in our willingness to learn. I had an experience. I was the opening plenary for the Renovar's Regathering Conference in May. June? May. I think May was the first. And I spoke about Abba Joseph saying, Abba Lot comes and says, I'm doing these disciplines, I have my daily rule, and I seek to be kind to people and keep my heart open. It doesn't feel like it's enough. What more shall I do? And Abba Joseph, this old man, stands up, stretches out his fingers to heaven. You've heard this. and his fingers became like little candles. And he said, why not become all fire? Why not become all fire? When I heard that desert story years ago, I said, I want to burn. Whatever in me is keeping me from being available to the Lord, burn it out and cause me to be like that bush God showed Moses. Notice that it's burning, but it's not being destroyed. It's not being consumed. This is the invitation. Why not become all flame? So I talked about that at Regathering. A couple days later, Ted Harrell, the president of Renovare, comes to me and says, there's a couple here, a couple of color, and they need to talk to you. And he said, and it's probably going to be hard to hear. I said, okay. So I sat down in a room with the two of them, and they talked about how what I said had hurt them and offended them. And I said, tell me what I said. Open my eyes, help me know. How can I change? How can I be welcoming to you? They were able to help a little bit, but not very much. But I carried that away. We had this conversation earlier today in asking that question about language. And Trevor was so wise in saying, we learn to be careful of our words. And I didn't even know that I was using language that could be interpreted by others as being harmful. Paul says, I become all things to all people so that there are no barriers in being able to really reach people. So these are things I think about. These are a bunch of things. It's a bowl of things that I'm bringing to you and saying, here's a bowl of things, full of objects, different objects. Kelly told a funny story last night, so that's what they're laughing about. Anyway, I'm carrying these things to you to say these are a number of things that God has collected, that Jesus has been bringing back to me again and again and again. It's showing up. It's being available. It's paying attention. So as we think about life's greatest opportunity, we get to be a piece of it. And the really great thing is it doesn't really depend on us because we're coming in, we're showing up with Jesus. So we just be who we are. I want to spend a little bit of Lectio Divina with Matthew 14, 22 to 36. You've thought about this a lot. You've preached on it. I want to see what may stand out to you in the story as we enter into the holodeck, and where we find ourselves as we enter into that holodeck is we're in a little tiny fishing boat, and it's dark, and it's windy, and the wind is against us, and you're wet. So picture yourself in that boat. You're in that boat, and allow yourself to imagine yourself in the scene, and to allow it to speak to you. Immediately, Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to the other side. Notice that. Go ahead of him to the other side. Not go out the middle and have a life-threatening accident. The language is so important. He made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to the other side while he dismissed the crowd. This is after the feeding of the 5,000. After he had dismissed them, the crowd, he went up on a mountainside by himself to pray. He needs to talk to Abba. Later that night, he was there alone, and the boat was considerably a distance from land, buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. I invite you in this moment to get a hold of the thing that if you could change it or have God do a miracle, it would be different. You get home tomorrow, it may be different. What is that thing that's on your mind, that burden that you're carrying? I want you to hang on to that with your gut. Shortly before dawn, that's the darkest part of the night. Shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. It's a ghost! See every head jerking around as somebody's pointing into the darkness, in the rain and in the wind, and they're straining their eyes. Dang! It's true, there are ghosts out here, dead fishermen. And one of them is out walking around. All their worst nightmares, vulnerability, you can't switch channels, you're too far from shore, you don't have any control of what's happening to you and this boat that you're responsible for. But Jesus immediately, that word again, Jesus immediately said to them, "Take courage, it is I. Don't be afraid." Don't be afraid. I can ask you to take a little bit of time to write a note, and you may be in that space right now. When have you recently felt like you're in a situation that just feels like it's out of control? You can't do anything about it. You've been praying about it. Nothing's going on. And you're responsible. Let's get a hold of our emotions in this because it's our story. Can I give you 5 minutes to let yourself remember that and let it rise to the surface and pop? If you can say, "Oh, Jimmy Dederas." What is it? What did you hear Jesus say to you? Bless you. dark, Jesus whispers, take courage, I'm right here. Don't be afraid. So, if you are willing, what is that message that you keep hearing Jesus repeating to you? What is he telling you? Someone willing to share?
Trust me.
Trust me. Don't be afraid.
I am for you.
I'm for you. I heard, baby, we've got this. And I thought, you're right, I'm a baby and I'm dependent and I'm afraid and I've been doing a lot of crying. Baby, we've got this. Now the next part of the story, being a one on the Enneagram, I just thought, who gets out of a boat in a storm? I mean, really. But look at this guy, Peter. Jesus gets him an imagination, doesn't he? If I look at things from Jesus' perspective, Brad, he sees things differently than I do down here in Flatland. And Peter sees something in that moment. And a possibility comes into his mind. And he says, oh, who does this? Jesus, if it's you, tell me to come to you across the water. I see so much humor in this. Lacey talks about this story, so much humor. I think Jesus just laughed when he heard Peter say, tell me to come to you across the water. It's Peter. I think Jesus just laughed and he said, come on then. And I can imagine the other disciples trying to grab Peter, pull him back as he's climbing out of the boat over the gunnels, puts his foot down on the water, maybe pokes it a little bit. Sure enough, it's water and it's deep. And then he just jumps out into it. And I read a story about some people in Indonesia. Mel Tari was this guy. And he had all kinds of miracles. And he was a missionary and he went places and there are lots of rivers and he walked on water. And he said it was like walking in a bathtub, that your feet would go down a little bit, but then there was a bottom. And you just, walk across the water and go on to the village where you tell people about Jesus. I was fascinated by it. That's the book I was reading when Jimmy Dederis' parents called. So I thought, well, shoot. Let's get out of the boat. Anyway, Lord, if it's you, tell me to come to you on the water. Come, Jesus says, laughing. And Peter got down out of the boat and walked on the water and came toward Jesus. Now, you have a story where you did something like that. It was totally outside of the realm of what you felt equipped to do or you wanted to do, but you did it because you knew you had to. You did something, you took your courage in your hands and you did something that's hard, something where you weren't sure how it was going to work out. You have done that. You got out of the boat. I want you to hang on to that because that's who you are. You have courage. You trust Jesus. And for every single one of you, especially during COVID, you did something you never, if you'd known 2 years earlier this was going to happen, you wouldn't have done it. And you would have said, I could never do that. But when it came to the moment and the need was there, you got out of that boat. And you did something you shouldn't have been able to do. You did it. This is who you are. This is who you are. Then that moment came when Peter blinked. I have blinked before. I've stepped out to do something I know the Lord's calling me to do. And then all of a sudden I become overwhelmed by the chaos around me. And how overwhelming it feels and how unsurvivable it feels. And I think, how did I get into this? And then you start feeling overwhelmed by I'm sinking. I love this story because he calls out. The only thing he knows to do is just yells help. We were in a Renovaré ministry team meeting and Don Thomas was there. Don's with the Lord now just this year. Don looked like he could play the line for the Chicago Bears or something. Big, huge black guy. And boy, when Don sings, opened up a portal and you were straight in the presence of God. And this was right after George Floyd. And Richard asked Don if he would speak. Don stood up, huge guy, threw back his head and yelled, "Help!" and sat down. That's what Peter did. That's what you do. Help. Jesus grabs hold of him, pulls him up out of the water, and Dallas says that Jesus gave Peter a nickname then and there, Little Faith. It didn't mean, what a bummer. You had such a good start, and now look at you. You're all wet because you blew it. Your faith failed. No, he was saying, look at you. You have made a strong, solid beginning. Good for you, Little Faith. Good for you. And then I think on the way back to the boat, I wonder if Jesus didn't say, now Peter, I'm curious to know, what thought came into your mind that made you take your eyes off me? What did you believe in that moment about yourself? What bully voice elbowed in? What bully voice whispered into your heart? And caused you to look away, filled your heart with fear. This is another one of the things in the bowl of what Jesus has talked to me about, is to identify my bully voices. So I asked Dallas. I don't even remember the context of it. He just said stuff and it gets seared on your brain and you never forget it. So I said, Dallas, do you ever struggle with sin? And he looked at me, he was very surprised by the question, and then he laughed. I didn't laugh. He laughed and he said, "Oh, Mimi, I know my sins and my temptations. I know myself. So when I see a temptation coming around the bend in the mountain road and heading down toward me, I turn my back and I do not show them hospitality." And I looked at him and I said, "Oh, I didn't know what he was talking about." I had no idea what he was talking about. I do now. You have things that you believe are true about you because there's always data. And that data feels compelling. And so you listen to it, and you take it to heart, and it wipes you out. So he said, when you see that thing coming before you, don't greet it. Don't offer it a cup of coffee. Don't ask if it wants to stay for a meal. Don't give it a room in your house to spend the night, and then moves in with all of the other crummy little friends. And pretty soon those crummy little friends have filled up your whole house, and you're living in 4 square feet of your kitchen because that's all that's left to you. And they're noisy, and they leave their laundry around, and their empty cans, and they're horrible. Don't invite them in. We have no business hosting these things. Absolutely no business. And that's where choice comes in. They're intrusive. You don't have to listen to that. You don't have to host it. You don't have to enter into an argument with it. You don't have to try to explain yourself. Turn your back and don't offer it hospitality. I think that's what Jesus and Peter talked about on the way back to the boat. How do you handle it when that voice comes in? What do? Turn your back and don't host it. So that's pretty much all I wanted to say. Shared stuff out of my little bowl of what Jesus wants to talk about. When he hums and looks off in the distance, when I ask him what to do about a situation, he just checks his watch. He's not very interested. But if I ask him what he wants to talk about, as Regina said this morning, he's pretty chatty. And what he wants to talk about is what makes me vulnerable. What he wants to talk about is how much he delights in me. What he wants to talk about is the concerns that he and I share for people. And he invites me to hold them in his presence and say, me too. Me too. I really want me too. You all, it's really easy for us to feel how dear you are to the Lord, how much he loves you, and how troubled we are by paying attention to the wrong things, being wounded by the wrong things, and how much he wants to call us into alignment. So as we conclude this time, and I said it would be earlier, and I wanted it to be earlier because I think y'all need coffee or a nap. You have a lot you've been hearing, and my invitation right now, in considering life's greatest opportunity, is to consider what it is that makes it so hard for you to believe that what Jesus is telling you is the truth. What makes that so hard to believe? Because the time we start listening to his voice and knowing that he knows us better than we know ourselves, and the enemy can tell you nothing true about yourself. The enemy deceives, is a liar. Didn't create you. and doesn't care about you. We don't have to listen to that stuff that gets piled on. You have no business listening to that. So as you come away from this time, as you prepare to come away tomorrow, I would invite you to think about that question Jesus asked Peter after he dumped him out of the water. Why did you listen? And here's what I want to tell you. He says to Peter, little faith, you've made a start. And that's going to grow. And it's going to develop wonderful deep roots. And it will bear fruit that will spread. But pay attention to the authority you give to the voices you hear. And if you have trouble doing that, talk to the person who knows you the best and loves you deeply, and ask them to help you identify the voices. My closest colleague for years, Ann Onamkara, soulmate, Celtic, would come to my office, stand in the door until I looked, and then she'd do this. What she meant is you're doing that little thing again. You're listening to that voice again. And you're flat on your face, and you're depressed, and you're crabby. Stop listening. So the people around you know what those voices are for you, and they're sick of it because they love you. So you should have another recommendation on a YouTube thing. Yesterday was real serious. Dr. Steve Bell's Dark Night and Soul. This one is Bob Newhart. Stop it! Have you seen it?
Yes.
You gotta watch that again, it'll make you laugh. It's like that dog chewing its foot. I just laughed so hard. I downloaded it so I could watch it some more and laugh some more. But look up Bob Newhart. You can get it on, and stop it. Look it up on YouTube. It's about 5 minutes long, and it will kill you laughing. But I think Bob is he's channeling Jesus. He's channeling Jesus. So that's our invitation. If you take nothing else out of this retreat, know you're much loved. And stop it! You don't have to entertain that stuff. Don't post it. That's your choice. That's what you can do. Okay. Someone pray for us. Abba, I know that you created us and you know exactly what our tensile strength is. You know what we are capable of handling. You have hardwired us for relationship with you. Lord Jesus, you show us what it takes to stay connected and not severed from our relationship with Abba, and to live into our full potential as human beings. Teach us to pay close attention to what you do and how you do it, and to your words, follow me. Do what you see me doing. And Holy Spirit, thank you for being the one who says, along with Bob Hart, stop it. Don't post those thoughts. They are not me. They are destructive, they are shaming, they overwhelm you, they depress you. You tune the frequency of your heart to my voice. And believe what I tell you, because I'm incapable of lying. Lean into your identity. Embrace it. Allow it to blow you up. Because we've got work to do. Heavenly Father, Lord Jesus, Holy Spirit, we are yours. And we want to become all fire. This is the cry of our heart. Help us, Jesus. Amen.